We are so grateful for this, the penultimate session in this year's, I think, very successful Salon series exploring artificial intelligence and humanity from a lot of different perspectives. We've been running this Beyond the Web series for the last 3 years, and this year the Ostrom Workshop and Hamilton Luger School, of course with Doc and Joyce Searles, we thought that we would focus more on governing artificial intelligence and getting voices from all over the place. So people who were not sort of the typical people you would think to speak on these topics. And I think that as a consequence, we've put together a very interesting series. All of them are online, so you can go back and listen to them, also on Doc's channels. But we are so grateful today that Jeff Jarvis has joined us. Thank you for being here. Doc's going to say a few more words, but again, thank you to everybody who's made this possible. We're very excited. Take it away, Doc.
So Jeff is an old friend who is not yet an old man. That's my job. I have here his latest book. He has a bunch of books. He writes books in the plural. Ironically, about the end of the age of print is his last. And I'm going to read from the, is this correctly called a flyleaf? I think it is. He holds the Leonard Toe Chair in Journalism and Innovation and directs the Knight Center for Entrepreneurial Journalism at City University of New York's Craig Newmark School of Journalism. He was a creator and founding managing editor of Entertainment Weekly, a TV critic for TV Guide and People, Sunday editor for the New York Daily News, a media columnist for the Guardian, a president and creative director of Advance.net. He blogs at buzzmachine.com. He's a continuing blogger. A lot of people stop. He did. It's great. Co-hosts the podcast This Week in Google on the Twit Network, where we both used to work together. Is the author of 5 books, What Would Google Do? Public Parts, How Sharing in the Digital Age Improves the Way We Work and Live, Geeks Bearing Gifts, Imagining New Futures for News, and Magazine, which is coming up, which will hold up right now. For those on TV watching, take a closer look. In Bloomberg's Object Lesson series. So he's going to lead us in a discussion of everything that's going to happen with AI, and take it away, Jeff.
Oh, Doc, thank you. I'm honored to be here. I'm humbled to follow Clay Shirky in this series, and humbled to be here with you, Doc. Doc has been my teacher for longer than he knows. It's worth noting that this year, I think it's this year, right, is the 25th anniversary of the Clue Train Manifesto.
Oh yeah, and we have Weinberger's here too. So
we have Weinberger here as well. So we should take a bow. But he's eating yogurt right now, and I think I've always called it the seminal work of internet culture, and so I think it's a really important piece. Oh, it was 2 days ago. Wow. Okay. Well, happy birthday, Clue Trainers. You taught me a lot about this idea that everything is conversation, and so I blame you for much that has followed. So I'm here to talk about the Gutenberg Parenthesis and AI. I'll hold up the book again. Thank you very much. At gutenbergparenthesis.com with discount codes, I should add. I should explain the idea of the Gutenberg Parenthesis really quickly. The phrase comes from 3 academics at the University of Southern Denmark, Tom Pettit, Lars Ole Sauerberg, and Marianne Borch. And it's their theory, but they kindly let me use it as a title, and it inspired this book. And their idea is that before Gutenberg, back in that time, society was highly conversational. Information was passed around mouth to mouth in stories and changed along the way. There was very little sense of ownership or authorship of stories. The business model of the scribes was fairly simple. It was one scribe, one book, God knows how long, and one patron to get it done. And then along comes Gutenberg. The Bible coming off the press about 1454, and much changes. And they argue that in that period, in the Gutenberg period, we start to look at things in a linear fashion. This is McLuhan saying that the line, this sentence is an example, is our organizing principle. We create with copyright a sense of a conversation as content and as property and as a tradable asset. The job of the industry is now to not so much to honor the ancients as the scribes did, but instead to honor the current expert, Frau, Doctor, Professor so-and-so, who wrote a book. And that dominated our culture and our lives for half a millennium and more. And now comes this theory. We come to the other end of the parenthesis, a slow, long stretch that could last decades, generations, even a century. But we come to the time when the internet and data and a connected world and AI begin to supersede print in our consciousness. Print doesn't go away, our lessons don't go away, but some things change. Once again, knowledge and information are passed around mouth to mouth, click to click, they're changed along the way. We have less of a sense of ownership and authorship, thus we have fights over copyright as newspapers try to stop Google from linking to them. We no longer honor the ancients, nor unfortunately do we honor the experts, but instead, as my friend David Weinberger has said, the smartest person in the room is the room itself. It is the network that connects us. And so what I thought was the case was that it was a coincidence that this was like prior times. And Tom Pettit, the co-creator of the Gutenberg Parenthesis, said, "No, you idiot," basically. He said that this is a return to what was before Gutenberg. And we have the opportunity to relearn the lessons that we had in that time. We have the opportunity to relearn the idea of a conversational society. We have the opportunity to rethink fundamentally society. And internet and AI do that to us. Now, given one thing that has not changed about publishing books is the biorhythms of them. It remains a languid process. So I was finishing the copy editing for this book, the Gutenberg Parenthesis, at the end of 2022, just as ChatGPT entered all of our consciousnesses. So I did not have the opportunity to really speculate about that in the book. I have a new preface for the paperback coming up, which is basically this talk. So thank you for having me do this talk because it helped me organize that preface. And so I think it's interesting to look at Gutenberg's lessons for AI. The book subtitle is that it's the lessons for the age of the internet. And I think of AI as an extension of the internet. For without the internet and that agglomeration of all human text and image, AI couldn't learn and couldn't do what it does. So I want to go through a few lessons around that and then have lots of discussion and argument and contention and whatever you will. The first is that I think what it must have been like to live in the last half of the 1400s, when there was a sudden abundance of words. It is often said, and it's disputed as well, that in those first 50 years of print, which are called the incunabular or the infant age of print, that the publishers, the printers of Europe, produced more books than had been produced by all the scribes of all history going back 1,000 years. Whether that's true in exactitude or not, the scale still says the same thing. There was an explosion of words upon people, and that had to be mind-blowing and changing in the worldview of those who lived through it. But it's not so hard for us to imagine that, since we have a similar explosion, an alphabetic avalanche today, as the internet pours forth no end of content and conversation. And now as AI can produce no end of text. My friend, I'm suddenly forgetting my friend's name. I'll come back to quote him in a minute. Doc and David are trying to say they're the old people here. I'm old too. I used to say this was prematurely gray. It is not. So the theory of the textpocalypse talks about, it was in the Atlantic a few months ago, talks about how when AI can produce all this content and then it learns on that content, it ends up becoming a gray goo. So we have to look at what happens with this avalanche of words that we have today. Their first response to it is today, as it was back in Gutenberg's age, wonder. This is amazing. The second response is fear about how it will be misused. And the third response is a reflexive desire to control what is said. And we saw that with Gutenberg, and we see it again today with both the internet and AI. And it takes us time to figure this out. So that leads to my next point, which is that we have time. This is perhaps the most controversial thing I say in the book, because some insist that we are undergoing change at a pace never before seen, and that history cannot teach us about that. I dare to disagree. I think that the pace of change after Gutenberg must have been volcanic to the people who lived through it. That when you get to the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation and the 30 Years' War and God knows what else occurred after that, the change was tremendous. And we think we're going through such change today, but that's rather the hubris of the present tense, that we think that what we must be going through must be far different from what everyone else went through. And so I think we have to first begin by studying history. So if you look at the spread of printing, after the Bible came off the press in about 1454, in 1480, printing was established in 90 cities. By the turn of the century, it was in 252 cities. It had spread all across Europe with lightning speed when you get right down to it. Now, the book itself did not look like the book that we have today for 50 years, because Gutenberg was not a man of his own age that he created. He was a man of the scribe's age. He replicated the scribe's work. The font looked like scribal handwriting. Books gained the characteristics that we know today: titles, title pages, indices, page numbers, indented paragraphs. Those all came toward the end of the incunabular period and into the next century. And by the way, come 1500, the book business was in shambles. People were writing to the Pope complaining they had warehouses filled with books they couldn't sell because they were holy books and nobody wanted them. The market had been saturated with the work of the ancients. Who came along and saved the industry of print? Martin Luther. And that changed everything come 1517. And it's not so much that he hammered his theses on the church door, but instead that the groan of the press in Wittenberg turned out the theses. It's also important that he chose to publish, and he chose to publish in German, not in Latin. And that itself, Andrew Pettigrew, who's really the dean of book historians today, says was the most important decision that could have been made, because it created a public. It created languages and soon nations. So my argument is that we have time, and that we don't yet know what the internet is. We don't yet know what AI is. We don't yet know fully what we can do with it. We don't yet know what the dangers are either. And our creation is yet to begin. And it's important, I think, to realize that we didn't really see a huge spur of innovation with print until 150 years after the Bible. Around 1600, we had four amazing inventions. The invention of the modern novel with Cervantes, the invention of the essay with Montaigne, the invention of a market for printed plays with Shakespeare, and the invention of a newspaper. That all came a century and a half later. And here I think we hearken to Clay Shirky, who said of social media that it gets interesting only when it's become boring. And I think that's what happened with print and the technology. The technology became boring. It fed into, back into the wallpaper. And what became interesting is what we did with it. The next thing I want to talk about is literacy. And obviously print had huge implications for literacy. Books and education created demand for each other. Literacy spread around and obviously changed society, changed our sense of education, thus our sense of childhood. It also changed because of Luther's decision to publish in German and to create High German, in essence. It created the sense of an official language. Umberto Eco has this wonderful line that dialects are languages without armies and navies. And that when print started to standardize languages and group them together, it also grouped peoples together into nations. And these are some of the effects that print had. So humanism was much of the business of early print. Later comes, of course, the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution. Print did not cause these things, but without print, could they have occurred in the time that they did? And with it comes our whole idea today of media. So literacy is an incredibly important as it relates to print. And now I think it's really important in a fascinating new way, because now with AI, we witness the literate machine. We witness the machine that can listen to us and can speak to us in our languages. I have a second podcast I've started called AI Inside at aiinside.show. Always be plugging. And we interviewed an AI executive a few months ago, and he said that the most powerful programming language on earth today is English. And soon, one hopes, other languages as well. Jensen Huang, the head of NVIDIA, said about 2 weeks ago that colleges should stop training computer scientists, and that it is domain expertise that will matter in this new world of AI. And that now that the machine is literate, he said, everyone is a programmer. Or another way to look at it is nothing is programming, everything is just language. And this becomes, I think, fascinating for our relationship to the machine and to each other. It also has huge implication for education. I've long been wanting, recent years, been wanting to start a new program. My last school scuttered this, but I hope to start it somewhere else, in what I'm calling internet studies. It is really about bringing the humanities and social sciences back into the discussion about the internet and technology. And that's about domain expertise. And so I wonder, I just came up with this thought the other day, that I wonder whether AI might reverse what Sputnik did to us. Sputnik killed liberal arts in favor of STEM, science, technology, and mathematics. And now we have the machine that speaks our language. And now we have the need to understand the internet, not as a technology, but as a human network. Now we need the study of human beings more than anything else. So we need to bring to the fore domain expertise in sociology, anthropology, psychology, history, ethics, philosophy, religion, design, community studies, and on and on and on. And so I wonder whether, now that the machine can speak our language, whether this is not potentially the revenge of the humanities and social sciences majors and arts majors. We will see. I say this in a university with some caution. I hope we have a few people run away from computer science and toward the classics just for the fun of it. Next idea I wanted to mention is what this does to our sense of responsibility and authority and authorship. Today, I find a fascinating discussion going on about who's responsible for the work of AI, for the products and perils of AI. I went to a World Economic Forum event. I used to get invited to Davos, but I'm not important anymore. So I got to go to a kiddie summer camp event in San Francisco called an AI Governance Summit. And there I saw a debate as to who should be held responsible for AI going wrong, because everyone's first response to a new technology is how it could go wrong and what we must do about that. And so the first level is to think that the model makers should be held responsible for what their models do. OpenAI, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, and so all the big people, because we like to go after the big companies now. Now, the problem with that is that AI is not unlike the printing press, a general machine. It is not a specific machine with just one job. A gun does one thing. It shoots a bullet to harm something. But the printing press could print anything. AI can be made to do anything. And there are those who try to say that AI must be held responsible and guardrails must be built so it can't do bad things. But you can never predict everything bad that human beings can want to make this machine do. It would be like holding Gutenberg responsible for every piece of crap that came off printing presses in years since. So I'm dubious about the idea that we can create effective guardrails against all human malign ideas at the level of the model, the technology. The next level down is the application layer or the intermediary layer. And here you have companies using AI to foist their chatbots upon their customers. We all saw the case, I think, of Air Canada had its bot gave a customer bad advice, and Air Canada tried to blame the bot rather than itself. Companies are also using these things, obviously, to fire people. Is the responsibility at that layer about how they're being used at an application layer? Or is the responsibility at the lower layer, at the user layer? The artist or the student who uses it to make up a paper. I covered, you all probably heard the story of the lawyer who used ChatGPT to come up with case citations and used them for a filing and got in trouble. I went and covered his hearing, his show cause hearing in federal court, where the judge made clear that the technology wasn't at fault, the lawyer was at fault, for he took the technology at its word. Indeed, he asked ChatGPT, are these cases real? And if he had to ask, he should have known better that they weren't. He knew in his heart that they weren't real. And so the fault then lies at that level. Well, the same exact discussion occurred in the progress of print, because at first the technologists, the printers, were held liable for what came off their presses. They were beheaded and behanded and burned at the stake for what came off the press. Next, the intermediaries were held responsible. That was the industry, the booksellers and the publishers. They had to stem the flow of heresies. The Stationers Company was started in London to make sure that print was licensed to proper and activities and books. And they were held responsible when bad stuff came out. But finally, the authorities found that the scale of print was such that they and their agents could not monitor it and control it sufficiently. And so rather than worrying about print before it was printed by licensing and censorship, now they worried about after it was printed and liability to whom now? To the writer. And this, says Foucault, was the moment when we saw the beginnings of authorship. If I can find the quote. Texts, books, and discourses began to have authors, says Foucault, to the extent that authors became subject to punishment. So who will be the author of AI? Is it the model maker? Is it OpenAI for making a machine that could be made to do bad things? Is it the intermediary? Is it Microsoft who puts it next to search and makes the poor lawyer think that it's going to have legitimate answers? Or the newspaper that uses it to write stories that don't have facts? Or is it us who go to it and ask it to do bad things, to give us bad pictures? Is it our fault? Obviously, responsibility should cut across all three, but it's an interesting question then about who is responsible is also who's in charge. So who is the author of AI? But I also think it's important that we look upon AI as a tool. It's a tool that can now talk with us. It's a tool that we can collaborate with. And if you look at the work of, let's say, Lev Manovich, he's doing really interesting work using AI. He's a digital humanities guy, but he's using AI to create art together. There's a lot of interesting work that goes with this. I've speculated that AI could be used to extend literacy. There are people like me who are weird in the world who think that we can write and that writing is a special skill. Well, now it's not so special at all because the AI can do everything we can do. And now the people who are the majority of the world who are intimidated by this skill of writing, whether it's an email or a story or a PowerPoint or anything, now AI can help them say what they want to say, and it can illustrate it. I think that's tremendously powerful, but I also think it's dangerous because, of course, AI has been taught on that which was published by those who had the power to publish in the past. That is the essence of AI's biases and its prejudices, is that it only has that power-based sense of our world. And I think that one of the tasks we have is to figure out what we have to add to the internet and add to the training sets of AI to make it more wholesome in its view of the world. When what's happening instead is we have the New York Times suing OpenAI to take their stuff down, to take it away, and to take quality news away. It's already behind paywalls for readers, and now they want it behind paywalls for AI to learn as well. We as journalists, I speak as a journalist, have a higher responsibility to the news and information ecosystem of our times. A few more ideas, then I'll shut up. One is that the idea of the Gutenberg parenthesis is a great measure that society was conversational before print. And I ask in the book whether Gutenberg ruined that, whether he captured and freeze-dried conversation and creativity into this thing we call content that merely fills things between covers. But print was still conversational in the early days. Luther was in conversation with the Pope in their books and the burnings of them. Erasmus and Sir Thomas More wrote each other letters to be included in their works as a conversational act. Samuel Richardson's novels were epistolary and conversational, and he extended that conversation with his readers. So print was conversational. So then what ruined conversation? I think it was the mechanization and industrialization of print in the mid 1800s with the steam-powered press, stereotyping, the linotype, my beloved linotype. I'm writing a book about that too, coming up. And then eventually cold type, in contrast to Gutenberg's hot type, of photo typesetting, and finally postscript, which finally made Gutenberg's grand invention obsolete. These things and a new business model led to the birth of mass media. I marked this in 1894 with a guy named Frank Munsey, who had a magazine using his name, where he learned that he could sell it at a loss and make money on advertising. And that was the beginning of the attention economy. That is what has corrupted everything, including the internet, to today. And we haven't reinvented that. We haven't figured that out yet. And so the long century of mass media, I think, started in the 1890s with the linotype and Munsey and other things, along with earlier the telegraph and cheap paper made from wood pulp and so on. And then finally broadcast and on to today. But what the internet does is it kills mass media's business model. It kills with it mass media, with good and bad, and it kills this idea, this insult of the mass. The idea of the mass is a way not to hear people and not to listen to them and not to understand them as individuals and communities, but to instead put them into a mob and a group who can be ignored. And I celebrate the death of the mass as well. And finally, the internet enables us to return to conversation, to talk with each other again, for good and ill. As I say in the Gutenberg parenthesis, we are clearly out of practice. We are clearly doing a shitty job of having the public conversation. But that sound we hear, that cacophony we hear, is democracy. Walter Cronkite saying, "And that's the way it is," was not democracy. It was the way it was only for a few limited people. Now we have a diversity of voices who were always there, who can finally be heard. In my theory, I believe that Martin Luther's Reformation couldn't have occurred without print. Again, print didn't cause it, but without print, Martin Luther would have been Jan Hus, who was burned at the stake. But print gave him the public that was not possible. And so I wonder where is that Reformation of today? And I wonder if that is not Black Lives Matter, made possible by Twitter, may it rest in peace with Elon Musk, and other movements like Me Too. And I wonder whether what we're seeing in America is a result of that voices for too long not heard in mass media run by people who look like me, old white men, can now finally have their stage and can be heard. And that is what the old white men resent. And so is Black Lives Matter, the racial reformation of our time. Was January 6th at the Capitol the counter-reformation? I don't know what's happening with public conversation, but we enter into a new age. So that's where I am in the book, The Gutenberg Parenthesis. But now here comes AI, which can speak. It's butting into our conversations. And I think we're going to have to ask at some point who we're talking with. When old farts complain about kids on their phones all the time, saying that acting as if they're interacting with a machine, when often they're not. They're interacting with the people, with their friends, via this device. But come AI, we are chatting with the machine. We are interacting with the machine. We have to decide who we want to talk to. The biggest decision we have to make is about what institutions we have. My favorite story from the book is of Niccolo Perotti, who was a translator of Latin in Italy, who was in 1470 said to have made the first call for censorship of print. He was much offended by a shoddy translation of Pliny. He wrote to the Pope, it's a great letter, and he said, you must appoint a censor. You must appoint someone of erudite scholarship to censor and approve all these things to come off the presses of Rome, as absurd as that is to imagine. As I thought about this, he wasn't at all asking for censorship. He was instead anticipating the creation of the institutions of editing and publishing that would follow and would all in all assure quality and authority and artistry in print for a half a millennium to follow. Those institutions are inadequate to the scale of speech today. And so we need to look at what institutions we need to support or reinvent or replace in this new reality. That's the essence of what it is we need to do. And so as a result, I think it's important that we have to study the internet as it is. I mentioned before that I want to start a new degree program somewhere, maybe in Indiana, in internet and technology and humanities, internet studies. Elizabeth Eisenstein started the scholarly field of book history in 1979 with her wonderful book, The Printing Press as an Agent of Change. And by the way, it was Clay Shirky, who doesn't know what he started in my brain, by recommending that book, and I got into that book and I absorbed it many times. And she started this field. And she said we need to understand the impact of print in society. My friend Andrew Pettigrew, who's written many wonderful books, the latest, I'll give him a plug, is called The Book at War. He's the dean of book scholars. And in this book, he looked at the impact of print in war as a tool, as a weapon, as a medium, as entertainment, and all of its guises. I think we need to follow that model with the internet today and understand what's happening from the perspectives of all of these other disciplines of anthropology, sociology, ethics, history, community studies, and on and on and on. And we need to understand these as human activities. The internet is a human network. AI is a tool for us humans. How we use it says much about us. AI reflects us. By what has been put into it to teach it, it reflects back to us our biases and our interests and our fears. By our fears of it, it reflects what we're afraid of and what we think of the world. And how we use it reflects our priorities and what we do with it. So AI, in the end, is a mirror. And it's up to us to understand how it's being used, how it's being produced, and so on. Last word. Martin Luther at some point called printing God's ultimate and greatest gift. So my question in the end is, can we imagine, I don't think it's God's gift, but can we imagine at some point considering the internet and AI as a gift? Well, that in the end is going to be up to us and the decisions that we make and what we make with it. I thank you for your kind attention to my fast New York talking. And I'm eager for the conversation, not just questions, but also challenges and whatever else you may have. And I haven't been able to read the sidebar, but I'll also try to dig into that.
Wow. Jeff, I don't think I'm over, I'm just reverbing, so.
You're good.
I'm good. Okay. I have to walk away from my computer, which I'll do. Okay. In your book, you tell this wonderful story about, it's a sad story, of course, about Savonarola, who was burned for his heresies, and which were reformist heresies. But not just, he was not the only victim, but the bell of the church that summoned parishioners at his monastery was declappered and exiled from Florence. And
not just that, it was put on a hangman's cart and whipped as it was marched through town.
And you leverage McLuhan, who said that every new medium contains the ones that it's obsolescing. And in that case, what it would contain was orality. It was not just what the speech of Savonarola, but the sound that the bell made. And it strikes me as all your questions about the internet are necessary and interesting, but the weird thing about the internet is it has absorbed everything. It's absorbed print, it's absorbed radio, it's absorbed television, it's absorbed every other medium you can name. And it calls to mind what Shoshana Zuboff, an earlier speaker here, said in the 1980s, in the age of the smart machine, that everything that can be digitized will be digitized. Everything that can be informated, which means made useful or turned into content in today's language, that will happen. And she went off to, this will lead to surveillance and control, but it'll also lead to everything. So I'm wondering how you study that. Any thoughts about hey, study the internet. It's like the old joke, describe the universe and give 3 examples, right? It's like, it's too big. And anybody wants to talk, raise your hand. I see there's at least one up there, so we'll keep track of that. Mark Heskey's first.
So please also look at what occurred in the sidebar, because I haven't had a chance to read that yet. I've seen all kinds of old friends' names here, and I'm delighted to see that. Hello there, Michael. Hello, Barry. I have a new book coming out in the fall called The Web We Weave: Why We Must Reclaim the Internet from Moguls, Misanthropes, and Moral Panic, in which I mark Zuboff as an exemplar of moral panic, by the way. The first words of the book are, to paraphrase Pogo, we have met the internet and it is us. And I think that view of the internet as absorbing everything, as this technology, is one in which we rob ourselves of our agency, and we act as if it is a thing, it is an actor, which would be the same as print. Print took over the world, but then print became boring, and print receded, and the technologists receded. And in my next book, I say it's time for us to demote the geeks. It is time for these other views to come forward, and these other disciplines, these other perspectives, and to see the challenges and the opportunities we have as innately human. So I don't think the internet absorbed everything. Some companies absorbed much of it, but I think they too are temporary, right? I remember when Microsoft was going to take over the world, and I was part of an effort when I worked at Condé Nast to buy Alta Vista with Time Inc., 2 names from the past. These beliefs that these companies are forever, they're not. We are. And I think that even Google and Meta are not forever. So when we get past that, and also with Meta, I think too often people refuse to see the trees for the forest, the opposite of the usual, right? We see Facebook as this big bad thing. Yeah, but there's 3 billion people there. And are we going to ignore them? And after we in big media, I speak for myself, ignored them for centuries in mass media, are we going to keep on ignoring them by turning that off and forgetting that? I think that we have to see the internet not as its companies, not as those temporary custodians of it, ill though some of them may be. We have to see the internet as us. And so I go back to the lessons I learned, Doc, from you and David in the Clue Train Manifesto. Happy birthday to you. Because it's about conversation, and conversations must occur among people. And so the internet is a place where we hold conversations. And so I get mad at myself. I recant in my next book about having somewhat abandoned my blog for Twitter. And I gave a lot of my own public discourse to this place that a narcissistic nihilist like Elon Musk could take it over. And so now I care more about Mastodon and Blue Sky and my blog on the open source platform of WordPress. And I think we have to go back to preserving and protecting the institutions of openness and transparency of the internet and reclaim it from those companies. And I think it's still possible. Mark, should I call on people? Or you, Doc, also tell me who's in the room and what's on the sidebar as well.
Mark, unmute if you're unmuted, and go for it.
I'm here. If you can hear me, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I'm very pleased to meet you. I'm Mark Prensky. I'm also writing my next book, my 11th book. So I hope we can connect at some point. I was going to tell you, and I posted in the chat that the internet is not a thing separate from us, it's us. And then you came out with that lovely phrase that the internet is us. And yet we talk about it. We don't talk about us, we talk about it. We don't say, how can we improve ourselves now that we also have a thing that's part of us called the internet, now that we have a thing that's part of us called AI, now that we have a thing that's part of us. So I wonder about the idea, the thing that I don't hear enough about, that I'm thinking about, is how do humans evolve non-biologically? So are humans with the internet, are humans with AI more evolved people then the other thing, I was just with a person on another call who said, you know, people are trying to reject technology in some of the indigenous cultures. They're saying, we don't want this kind of stuff. And so the question is, are they saying we want to stay more primitive people? We don't want to be the most advanced people that humans can be. We want to be what humans have always been. And it really bothers me when people center around what people have always been as opposed to what people are becoming. That's my question about what you think about that.
And I think it's provocative. I think that oftentimes the belief in nostalgia is the belief in a myth. Mm-hmm. And it's it's a past that we thought we had but didn't have. I go back to Walter Cronkite, and that's the way it is. Right? Well, if you were Black or Latino or LGBTQ or an immigrant or disabled and on and on and on, it wasn't the way it was for you in America. It is fundamentally conservative to wish for technology to go away rather than taking charge of it. 2 points. In my next book, The Web We Weave, out this fall, it turned into more than I thought it would. It turned into a critique of media's moral panic. And as a media person, it was a self criticism of our field, where the conservatism of media of attacking the technology. They loved it for a while and then they hated it. A researcher named Neeraj Weisblatt did a study that found that there was the switch from utopian to dystopian views of the internet came on a date, and that date was the election of Donald Trump, when media wanted somebody else to blame for all of our problems. And so the moral panic that occurs now over the internet occurred over print and novels and television and radio and the telegraph and comic books and video games and movies, right? But media people have no sense of history, and we act as if it's the first time we're going through this, and we have this fundamentally conservative view. The New York Times had a feature the other day about a German, I don't want to say cult, community that lives in German-rooted community that lives in various places in the Hudson Valley of New York, where, they have a few laptops and a few phones, but they don't use them really, and they get rid of them. And the New York Times is saying how wonderful this is. In the same breath that this community forbids homosexuality and divorce, and keeping women in abusive relationships as a result. No, I'm not nostalgic for that. I think that we have to consider what is the best of us. Now, are we evolved? Is this truly progress? Do we define it as progress? I think the other danger, one thing I learned in writing about the Gutenberg Parenthesis, is the danger of periodization, is the idea that the Dark Ages were dark. They weren't. There was much invention that occurred in the Dark Ages, in medieval times. But the argument is that the invention of the idea of Dark Ages was a modern invention foisted on rejecting our forebears to make us look better, and also to enable anthropology and imperialism to take over peoples who were viewed to be primitive, because they weren't like us today, they were like us before. So in that case, we rejected the past to make ourselves look better. This comes back to this question of the hubris of the present tense. We always think that we are better. We always think that we know more. There's a lot to be learned from history. So I think that you and I agree that we need to look at all of this as a human venture. And the question is, we can screw this up. We could do this miserably. We could do this horribly. I'm not saying that it's determinative. I'm not saying that I'm a utopianist. I'm not in either case. What I'm saying is that we have choices to make, and we should make those choices wise to the history of those choices and how they were made before, good and bad.
We have a question in the room, and then to Barbara.
Okay. Yeah, first in the room. Sorry.
Jeff, hi. My name is Charlie Schweik. I'm a faculty at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. I love this talk. It was really worth me driving from Massachusetts to Indiana to hear it. I also want to thank you for your point about we have time related to this. I've been studying technology my entire career, I've written a book on open source software communities, for example. When I talk to my students, I've made that same message. And I think it gives us hope that, the time frame that this has been around is so small when you think of the length of humanity. And it's an important message to give the next generations to realize we have time to try to figure out how to make this work the way we want it to work. Now my question, and I guess it's maybe a little pushback or just a puzzle, is related to your point about the death of mass media and celebrating it. I agree with that. The question it raised for me is the issue of algorithms in social media and the way these algorithms are driving what individuals look at, what they like, and bringing more of that same kind of material, splintering our society in a way by having you watch more of the things you like. It feels to me like there's still a presence of mass media in these camps that are driven by algorithms. And I'm curious what you think of that. Thank you.
Let me ask you, what was your name again? I missed it.
Charlie Schweig.
Hi, Charlie.
Yeah.
I hope you have a fun time in Indiana.
I'm having a blast.
What other kind of time is there in Indiana?
Fantastic.
Go up to Chicago for some really good pizza, but I'm a Chicago boy. So I thought we were going to argue, but we're not going to, because you turned it at the end there where I agree with you that you made a very interesting idea that the mass media is in the algorithms. Normally what I hear, of course, is algorithms are evil and they're awful and they're terrible and they're skewing everything, and I disagree. There's some research out of late from a group led by Josh Tucker at NYU and Talia Stroud at UT Austin that found that when the algorithm was taken off of Facebook and Instagram, it did not result in better political knowledge. It did not result in less division and so on. The algorithm, in fact, had people looking at more bad stuff because the algorithm was helpful in finding some good stuff. And we actually need more help in finding good stuff. Harper's Magazine, when it started in 1850, had an explicitly curatorial mission to say, there's more words than ever now. Industrialized press has given us all this more media. Somebody needs to help you find the good stuff. And that's what we're here for. Before it changed to us creating our own exclusive stuff, it was curatorial as a member of an ecosystem, which was an attitude that didn't last long, but was important. And I think we need that today. And I think algorithms can help with that. Now, obviously, some algorithms are tuned in ways that are not as helpful. Now that Facebook has pretty much given up news, I am fed up with everybody's birthday being there constantly because I'm old and I don't like birthdays. I want them to stop. And so the algorithm cannot give me what I want. I want more power over the algorithm. This is why Blue Sky is interesting to me, because it gives me the choice of feeds that I can have. And I think that's what we're going to want and to have. Algorithms are not evil, but they're being portrayed that way as part of moral panic that occurs around technology. I think we have to get a lot more nuanced about the discussion to say who's in charge of them, what power do we have over them to use them for our own ends. But there is no such thing as neutrality. And we wouldn't want neutrality in a world that is being manipulated by right-wing hate groups, because they're using that as a mission in the laws of Texas and Florida to say, no, you must be neutral as a platform and you must carry this hate speech. Compelled speech is not free speech, and choice is speech itself. So whether I'm the editor of a series of books or a newspaper or a magazine or a platform, my choice of what to carry and not to carry is itself my expression and is speech. So they have the right to choose what to carry and what not, and I think that's important. So it's not the question that the algorithm, I think, is bad. I think the way you said it at the end is that the algorithm carries forward the model of media and the attention economy. And that's what's wrong with it. And so I think that the question is, can we invent better algorithms, which is what AI is going to be in the end? Wiser algorithms that do what we want and that are wiser in doing that, and we'll see. By the way, Charlie, if I can ever come and talk to a class of yours, let me know.
I'll email you.
Barbara.
Barbara.
You have to get off mute, Barbara.
Hey, thank you so much. This is absolutely amazing. I'm huge fans of you. I'm a huge fan of you, Jeff. A question for actually both Jeff and Doc Searles in terms of the economics of AI. Jeff, in your book, Public Parts, you talk about how the large profit margins that newspapers used to enjoy in the past were built on artificial scarcity, limited choice for advertisers as well as readers. And then with the internet, that scarcity was taken away and replaced with abundance. And Doc, in the Clue Train Manifesto, you talk about how every economic era is characterized by a set of abundances and a set of scarcities, and how firms that can take advantage of these abundances as well as the scarcities are bound to succeed. So with AI, obviously the scarcity is being replaced by abundance in terms of labor, intellectual, us, and creative labor. What does this imply for the world? I'm really struggling to figure this out. And which companies are best positioned to take advantage of this?
Doc, you want to go first?
I can make this short in a way because I barely remember having written that. So, being like 26 years ago. It sounded good, didn't it, I suppose? I'll go straight to your last question there. I think the companies best positioned are ones that don't exist yet. As Jeff is pointing out, we're really early in whatever era this is. We've been digital beings in McLuhan's terms for maybe a decade. And it's like for the last decade that we've been carrying around rectangles everywhere we go that we really can't get along without, that are extensions of ourselves and are also suction cups on the tentacles of giants. And this is all new to human experience. Everything we're doing, I mean, right now, all of us here, we're all over the world, we're zero distance apart in both the practical sense and in cost. It costs almost nothing for us all to be together. And that end of distance, not understanding anymore in our bones what the inverse square law means. Like I have to yell louder to get somebody in the other room, but they're right with me on the phone. Joyce, who's here in the room, speaks of this as like living without gravity. We're living in a new environment that has no gravity, and it's going to take a while to get used to this. And we're barely started. It's just, we'll be digital for not just decades or centuries, but maybe for as long as we're a species. It's a state change that's verges on the absolute. And to me, it's like, it almost doesn't matter what companies win. Mark's point, Jeff's point, that this is us. How do we become more human? How do we become more humane? How do we become a better species? We're a horribly pestilential species in the grandest sense that we're going to rename this era the Anthropocene with good reason, and that's not a right thing. How do we improve on that? And I don't think it's by going to Mars. I think it's by other things. Anyway, go ahead, Jeff.
So Barbara, you hit on one of the things that I try to figure out most, which is basically scale.
Yeah.
Scale became everything since the mechanization and industrialization of print. It became the bigger audience you had, the better. And the more people talk about how, well, if you don't pay for the product, you are the product. That's the business model of media since 1894. We have been the product of media since then. And only scale mattered. Same obviously with broadcast, same with the blockbuster economy of non-ad supported movies and music and books. So scale was everything. The paradox of the internet to me is that it is the huge scale of the internet that enables small to work again, that enables big enough to be big enough again. That the fact that I can find everyone on the internet means I can find the people who are just like me. So I have a Twitter list of book history walks that is my happy place. There's not a lot of us out there, right? But we found each other, or I've found them, at least they're the real experts, and I enjoy that community and I learn from that community, and it is media at a human scale. The problem is that the business models of media today are still built, including the internet, are still built for print scale. Mm-hmm. And I think that we have yet to figure out how to build things small again. Now, as a journalism teacher, I started an entrepreneurial journalism program and an engagement journalism program at my now former school, CUNY. And that was about bringing things down to that kind of human scale. What's the business model? I was just talking to one of my alums right before this meeting, and there's no easy answer. And philanthropy won't do it all, and patronage won't do it all, and government money scares me when it comes to speech and journalism and media. But at a human scale, I see things that can work. Ken Doctor is an analyst of media who started Outlook Santa Cruz. He's serving just the county of Santa Cruz County, California, and he's making it work. And we can find those kinds of exemplars everywhere, where if your goal is not to be the huge thing in the world, but is to be brought down to a more manageable scale, I think that there are new opportunities to be had. And so who's best positioned to do that? I don't think anybody is right now. I think Google is an enabler, and it works for now. My phone was about to talk to me. Meta has gone probably as far as it can. And I wonder about things like networks like Blue Sky and Mastodon. When I ran played host to a Black Twitter summit in my school last year, Eugen Rochko, the founder of Mastodon, came. And in the entire time of Mastodon, from then to the beginning, he had raised no more than $500,000. And he only serves 14 million people, but it's 14 million people, and it's big enough for the conversations that I have there, and it's wonderful for that, right? It's big enough. At the same time, Musk spent 44 billion buying Twitter and ruining it. So I think can we reimagine scale post-mass is kind of the next question that I want to imagine. And then it's not going to be single big companies to buy into. It's going to be a lot of littles. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it's really the long tail of content creation generation now is being enabled.
Thank you for being one of the 3 people who actually bought Public Parts. I appreciate that.
One of my favorite books. Thank you.
Thank you.
You want Mark? You want to go?
Yeah, Mark, you have your hand up. I want to tell everybody else, I singled out Michael Grossman, who asked a question in the midst of a comment, to raise your hand and ask it verbally, because I'm trying to scroll back through this, and there's almost too much.
It would be great for me to hear Michael's voice, because we worked together back at Entertainment Weekly, ending in 1991.
Wow.
Yep. Way back. Good to see you, Jeff.
Mark, you think you're talking, but you're muted.
Take it back. I'll start again. This is fun. Thank you for this discussion. I'm really happy to be part of it. I'm wondering now whether there used to be a scale which was top down, and that's the scale you just spoke of. I'm wondering whether there's a new kind of scale, which is virality, which is more bottom up, that somebody puts something out there, and for whatever reason, which is complex, it becomes viral. And when it becomes viral, that is a new kind of scale. And that a lot of people want that kind of scale these days. That's actually what many people who are on the internet seek, is virality. And so is that going to be a different kind of scale than the scale that we had before?
So with respect, I think you're still thinking in mass media terms, where big matters. Scale doesn't necessarily matter. It depends on what you want to do. If you want to find book history wonks, then I want to find just the people who are interested in book history, and scale is big enough then at a different level. I would recommend I learned a lesson about this, which I write about in the Gutenberg Parenthesis, from Andre Brock Jr., who is the author of the book Distributed Blackness. Andre is one of the experts in Black Twitter, alongside Meredith Clark and Charlton McElwain. Meredith from Northeastern, Charlton from NYU. Andre is at Georgia Tech, and in his book, he writes about Black Twitter as a place for communities, plural, to be themselves, not under white gaze and under white expectation, and to be who they want to be with their daily joys and sorrows. Now, I came to this with my mass media brain, and I thought, aha, yes, Black Twitter succeeded with Black Lives Matter. And Andre taught me, no, that's the wrong scale. Fine, they used that power to make Black Lives Matter matter. That power can be used to elect candidates and so on. But what matters about Black Twitter is not to be big. What matters about Black Twitter is the opposite, is to be small enough to be off the radar of people like me, and to speak their own language in their own ways with their own understanding, and not to expect virality, not to expect scale. That isn't the goal. The goal, in a wonderful word that Brock uses, is jouissance. It's the joy of the everyday.
I'd put it differently. This is a big area where I will push back because what the internet does, one of the great things is what you described, is that it enables affinity groups. And those affinity groups can be any size, they can be anywhere, and that is a new definition of community. I think community is actually shifting from locality to affinity. But on the other hand, there are plenty of good reasons for people to do things in groups, and often in large groups, and many people desire to do things in large groups.
I'm not arguing that that's not still going to be the case. We're still going to have blockbuster movies. You're still going to have blockbuster books. You're still going to have political campaigns that matter. Fine, but that's all that mattered in old media, and now we need to value community and small again. That's my point.
Okay.
Michael, and then Scott.
Duck asked me to ask my question aloud, and I don't know which one he meant, but
there's so many.
Merge them.
But they all had to do with this idea of scale and protection from scale, from the mass, and the ability to, even down to the point of individuality with AI, find technological support for being more uniquely ourselves and more uniquely our groups. And I do think, I don't know if we disagree here, but I'm curious about your thoughts about, you were speaking pro-algorithmically in a way that I think I agree with, that there's the ability to individually practice algorithms as opposed to having algorithms, mass algorithms imposed on you for the desire of garnering more of your attention. You know, I'm just wondering if there are ways to push toward algorithms that give you focus and again allow you to be more uniquely you, and allow small groups to be more uniquely themselves.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of talk today about identity politics as a negative. I think it's very much a positive, insofar as I can be me, you can be you, and we can find commonality, which goes somewhat to Mark's point about where we find the linkages matter as well. But we can still be ourselves in our own communities, and I think that matters. The problem with the idea of mass, to start with your first point, is that it is primarily an insult. I'm reading from the Gutenberg Parenthesis. The mass is, of course, a fiction, said John Kerry. Its function as a linguistic device is to eliminate the human status of the majority of people. Dwight MacDonald said, for masses are not people. They are not the man on the street or the average man. They are not even the figment of liberal condescension, the common man. The masses are rather man as non-man. They are, I say, a rounding up, a sociological ellipsis, a human, etc. That's the problem I have with mass, is how it's used externally. That we in media created these ideas of demographics and psychographics, and it was ways to put people into buckets and not really listen to them as individuals. So before we get to the algorithm, I still value the internet as a way that people can speak as themselves in that cacophony that is society and democracy. And the question then becomes, how do we listen to them in new ways? It's impossible to listen to them. I also quote James Carey, the late Columbia professor, about the ills of public opinion polling. That polling, he says, preempts the public conversation it is intended to measure. It is a way to preempt that discussion and to impose it on people with our own biases. That's the way we tried to listen in mass sense, either by a man on the street or a poll, both of them horrible mechanisms. Where is the Harper's Magazine of 1854 today, where we have all these voices? Well, no human beings can find all this. So can algorithms help us find unique voices rather than finding the same? David Weinberger, who's gone right now, said he put a column in to one of the ChatGPT or equivalent, and it toned down his language to make it the same as all language before. That's the exact wrong way to do this. What you want to do instead is find what's unusual, find what stands out, find commonality in different ways. I think that algorithms in the long run will be able to do that. Right now, they're doing the opposite. They're taking the entire text of humanity visible digitally and finding the lowest common denominator. And that's not what we want, I think. I think we instead want to hear a lot of peaks and valleys of individuals. And I think that that's possible. I think it can be done. It's just not being done today. Scott, I see Mark is growling at me again, but we'll get back to that.
That's okay. I have different opinions. We'll share. Hopefully we'll talk.
That's right.
Okay. So
I'm from New York too.
My question is, how do siloed communities on the internet have meaningful public debates between these different communities that believe fundamentally different sets of facts?
That's the key question of the time, isn't it? I am coming. So after 2016, I raised a bucket load of money from various parties, including, full disclosure, Meta, then Facebook, to fund projects at places like Data and Society about disinformation, misinformation. And I think that was probably a fool's errand. That's playing whack-a-mole with the bad shit. And to Michael's point before, I think the more important task is to find the good shit and to find the important conversations and the good conversations and to connect people. And I think there's work that is done there. There's a woman named Eve Perlman who runs a little outfit called Spaceship Media, where she finds communities in conflict and helps them come together for informed conversation. They don't agree necessarily, but the journalist adds facts to their conversation, things they're wrong about, want to know, or confused about. That's one small model. Deliberative journalism is another one, where people learn things first and then talk about it. But what I've come to see in the ills of America today, I think that too much of what we talk about ignores the factor of race in what's going on. And the fact that, as I said before, communities that were not heard before are now heard causes resentment and fear from those who held the power and the hegemony over speech. And we talk a lot about disinformation. We talk about people believing crazy things and saying crazy things. I've come to learn that much of that is probably not about belief. It's instead about belonging. I quote Hannah Arendt at length in the Gutenberg Parenthesis on this, that totalitarianism, authoritarianism, fascism feed off people not belonging. This is part of the problem with the mass. You don't belong to anything. You are made into a non-person. And so when people say crazy stuff, even when they vote for crazy people, says some recent research, they're not necessarily saying what they believe. They're saying, this is what I want to belong to, because I don't belong elsewhere, or because other people don't make me feel welcome elsewhere. Now, I'm not saying we should make fascists feel racists and sexists feel welcome, not at all. But I am saying that I think to understand where they are, we have to understand this is not just a problem of information and facts. We in journalism like to look at the world that way, because if the problem is misinformation, the solution must be information. That's the business we're in. But the problem, I think, goes to sociology and anthropology and psychology a lot more than to journalism in understanding how people connect. So then the question is, and this I asked in a couple books, how do we make strangers less strange? That to me is more important than facts in the end. How do we encourage some understanding and empathy? And I don't mean agreement with, I'm not going to agree with Trump's some fine people ever. But how do we at some point see the roots of their beliefs even noxious, so we can start to deal with it at that root level. That's why I get mad at the idea that the internet is to blame for everything and the moral panic around the internet. And if we just take phones away from teenagers, everything will be okay. No, life is not that simple.
I'm looking around.
I think
we may be near the end here because we've lost a few people, and but there are so many questions that are and comments that are still here.
I have a question related to
Okay,
to
great.
what he was just talking
please here.
Hi, Professor Jarvis. I'm Fred Schlegel. I've been listening to you on Twitter and reading your blog for as long as I can remember. In regards to what you were just talking about, there's a gentleman here in Bloomington who has started reporting on government, very local. He's taking subscriptions through Patreon, I believe it is, and I know more about how Bloomington is operating than I have in probably 10 years. And so he's becoming a local, Dave Atkins. And it is a place where now we can have conversations about things we know, rather than these grand global things that we seem to talk about. And I wonder how much of the conversational problem is that we're trying to take on things that are so big, so much outside of what we are, that we're not having conversations about where we live or the day-to-day, and what your view on that. And I know you've been very instrumental in trying to find new models for journalism, and so that's I hope that makes sense.
Yes, I think so. Sorry, I stood up. I wanted to get another prop. Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, right? And Postman taught me this lesson, that the Telegraph could probably be blamed for much of that, because the Telegraph killed relevance, in his view. It made the irrelevant relevant. That is to say, there's a bus crash in Serbia, becomes news everywhere the same. Right. And it's a tragedy in Serbia, and I feel for them, but there's nothing I can do about it. And it only leads to frustration that I can't do anything about the unsafe roads in Serbia. I'm sure they're very safe. I'm just making this up. Thoreau too said that irrelevance becomes relevant, and that's a lot of the issue. And so media made its business come the Telegraph of trying to report everything everywhere, and the myth that they could, which of course they can't, never could. Now I don't think that. So we lose the primacy of local, and we lose the ability to see the things about which we can have impact. I think that's true. However, I also think that a lot of what funders are talking about these days and saying we must support local journalism, that local journalism is everything, we need to bring it back, they often mean dead newspapers owned by companies like Gannett that are owned by hedge funds now that are a disaster. And it doesn't take account of what are the new opportunities for new definitions of local. So my definition of local includes Doc Searls and David Weinberger from my early days of blogging in the internet. And going to BloggerCon at Harvard. That was my local, much more than my neighborhood. In my neighborhood, I've got Trumpists who don't like me and I don't like them. And yes, I had to fight with my people to get rid of the crazies who were killing books on our school board. And yes, that matters, but it's not the only definition of local that matters. People who've had prostate cancer is a definition of local for me. Book history wonks is a definition of local for me. Journalists is a definition of local for me. Teachers, and so on and so on and so on, right? Those communities that I feel an affinity to matter to me as well. So it's an emphatic yes, that's the scale I keep on trying to reimagine and get back to, but it defines local more generously than we did in the past. At the same time, it could define local much more finely down to your neighborhood. It doesn't have to be the whole metro area or the whole of Indiana or the whole of the New York metro, which is just as hard to get our heads around. So I really celebrate hyperlocal, and I was hoping for more of the world to benefit from it. Unfortunately, I was wrong about that, because journalists don't like being business people, and they want to do more than eat ramen noodles every day at best. And so it's hard to support that level economically. But if you look here in New Jersey, where I am, the New Jersey News Commons, which I helped start at Montclair State University, has 425 members who are trying to do local journalism at one level or one kind or another. Hallelujah. The Lion has 450 members doing local journalism around the country. INN, nonprofit news, about another 400 some members. Those are all small and they're spotty and they're here and there. And Dan Miller, you're right. I wish it were next door. I hoped it was going to be next door, but it's not in the comments. But I do think that that's where the future of journalism is going to lie, as long as we are generous about this idea of local.
Do we need to redefine or use a different word than local? Is local, now that it means something different, now that it means affinity, among other things, should we use a new word?
Yes, but I'm not sure what it is. When I started the engagement journalism program with my colleague Carrie Brown, we called it social journalism, but that confused people. We now use the title engagement journalism because that's the title used in the field, but I don't much like that either. Community journalism, I think, is the closest we come to, but that has kind of old meanings. Public journalism, which Jay Rosen was involved with back in the 90s, also brings baggage of the day. So yes, I would like a new term, but I don't know what it is.
How about affinity journalism?
Yes, I think so. I like that generally, but I also think that people tend to interpret that as filter bubble, echo chamber problems. And filter bubble and echo chamber have been debunked as phenomena, but it's still held out as a risk and a danger of that notion of affinity. So I'm not sure.
It is. We have confirmation bias.
Well, everybody does, certainly. But the truth is that research has shown again and again and again. I recommend a book by Axel Bruns called Are Filter Bubbles Real? Which is a wonderful literature review that shows that filter bubbles were a myth of their own sort. That people, in fact, are more exposed to divergent opinions on the internet than they were in so-called real life.
Because we're about at the end here, but I want to put in a word for Dave Askins, who was just mentioned earlier, who's doing the East-Squared Bulletin here in Bloomington, and Joyce and I are working with on the news.
God's work, Joyce. God's work.
It is. We hope so anyway. But an interesting thing about, two things about local news, as Dave sees it, Dave is a very original thinker on this and a real leader. One is that people locally, it's not an affinity group. It's like if everybody cares about the potholes or the trees falling down or the accident that happened at 5th and Main, those are facts that people care about that are in their lives. And sharing reality, sharing the physical world is a really meaningful and important source of coherence for people who live near each other and with each other. So that's one thing. Another thing that Dave goes into is almost all of journalism is about stories, and that's what we're always told. That our assignment editors back when we worked in newspapers always said, "What's the story? Don't come back with it. We don't have a story." But facts actually matter more in the long run, and accumulating facts gives us what Dave calls deep news, the kind that decision makers can rely on that have nothing to do with party favors or any of the rest of that. Anyway, I want to point that out. It's on my blog. If you go to doc.searles.com, you can see the news comments there. This is a work in progress. It's very early, like everything else, but it's a thing. So I just wanted to share that. Any last thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to respond just to story. I think one thing I write about in Gutenberg Parenthesis is that we have to reckon as journalists with the idea that being the storyteller is a position of power, that we get to decide what the story is and who's in the story and who's not in the story and how the story begins and ends. And that's a Gutenberg artifact that we might need to get over, and presenting facts and information and viewpoints in different ways is one of the opportunities we now have.
Yeah. So, to be continued. Next month we have Don Norman. I don't know if you know Don, the Things That Make Us Smart, Design of Everyday Things, and many other works. He's been with Apple and HP and many others, as well as the Academy.
April 9th.
And that will be April 9th. So I invite everybody who's here now to come back then, and everybody else. So thanks so much, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. This was fantastic.
Thank you both. Thank you all very much. Good night.
Yeah.